and welcome to the Subwave. I'm Sebastian D. Temple.
And I'm Brittany D. Temple.
And today we're gonna be talking about Series 1, Episode 3, The Unquiet Dead. And here is the episode synopsis. The Doctor takes Rose back through time to 1869, but in Victorian Cardiff, the dead are walking and creatures made of gas are on the loose. The time travelers team up with Charles Dickens to investigate Mr. Sneed, the local undertaker. Can they halt the plans of the ethereal Gelf?
Dun dun dun. Again.
Again?
Yeah, I know. They all sound so eerie when you read it.
They do.
Dun,
and
dun.
especially because this is like a ghost story.
I know. This
Essentially
is true.
straight up just spooky ghosts everywhere.
It's
except
very
aliens.
scary.
It is.
It's definitely very frightened in this episode, as I am in most Doctor Who episodes, but this one I was definitely frightened in.
Yeah.
Well, the part of the reason why I like Doctor Who, and I think it's such a great show, is that it doesn't have just one genre.
Mm-hmm.
And, it blends all genres, basically. And there's not a lot of shows, if you look at, the history of television, that can do that. So many genres into one show. And so this is kind of where a lot of the, horror part of the show is really displayed, which, I think that makes it a big part of what it is.
And I know Doctor Who can be terrifying in a lot of different ways, but it's nice to get into this revival with just a straight-up ghost story.
Yeah.
It's not Daleks or Cybermen or something else horrifying in a totally different way.
It's something definitely that people can relate to more because, who hasn't heard a ghost story? Especially when, you bring in Charles Dickens where, everyone knows Christmas Carol.
Yeah. Also in this episode, not that I know that this was actually really in play yet, but we sort of get the foundation for Torchwood. The establishment of the rift in Cardiff, and Eve Miles, being in the episode and later showing up as Gwen Cooper, which we'll see a bit more of that in the next episode as well, too. So even this far back, like we've discussed before, they're laying groundwork for big things yet to come.
Yeah. I'll admit, I haven't seen a lot of Torchwood. I've seen a few episodes, but I definitely haven't seen a lot. But did they know the whole time that they were going to do a spin-off? Or do you know?
I don't know, which is why I'm very unsure about this.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly have no idea.
Yeah, when did Torchwood come into play, series-wise with?
Because, let's see, Jack shows up at the end of this series. Or mid to late series, yeah.
Not to get off on a total tangent, but...
That's okay. I was gonna just look. Torchwood premiered on the 22nd of October, 2006, which would put it about a third of the way into Series 2 of Doctor Who.
Interesting.
Who knows if it was planned? Honestly, I have no idea. If anyone knows, that would be cool.
Please let us know. Please enlighten us.
Yeah.
Teach us things we don't know about Doctor Who.
Especially because we don't have time to go and do research in the middle of an episode. I could just sit here, I was on IMDb going, when was this?
Yeah, I know. I did enough research about, Charles Dickens and stuff prior to this episode, so...
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm researched out. Something I found out about this episode that I did not know is who wrote the episode was, I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, but Mark Gatiss?
Gatiss.
Dang it! I could have gone one of two ways. It was one of two ways. But,
yeah.
Obviously I watched Sherlock, and he was on Game of Thrones as well, but yeah, I was just kind of searching around about the episode, and I was like, oh, I didn't even know that he wrote for Doctor Who.
Yeah, he's written several episodes More recently, I do believe, I'm probably misspeaking, he's probably written more than I think he has. But he's big into horror films and stuff, so it makes sense that he would be writing a ghost story
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah, I just thought that it's always interesting to, like, see other people from different shows doing, like, the behind the scenes stuff. I always like to look at, like, who directs and who writes and, all of that, because I find it really interesting. So.
Yeah, so this is the first one he's written, and he shows up in several episodes, though not always recognizable.
Yes, I did read that as well.
But yeah, it's cool that we've had some of these long-lived writers on the show.
Those are always the best shows because, you want that consistency throughout all of your series. And, when you see television shows that people say, like, jump the shark or kind of fall off midway through all of their series, it's typically because, like, the showrunner has changed or the writers all change and everything. So it's definitely good to have that consistency, I think.
Yeah, and especially because Doctor Who doesn't function under the writer's room form of writing like a sitcom, or I guess a lot of American television shows do that.
Yep.
Where it's mostly just one writer per episode. It's really nice to have that consistency, not only in the long term, but in one episode as well.
Yep. So this is the first episode that we see the Doctor go into the past with, Rose. And Rose
Yeah,
going
we're
into the
sort of
past.
covering all of our bases here in the first 3 episodes, because we had Earth present day, Earth in the future, and now Earth in the past. We're sort of just getting everything right out of the way to begin with, which I think not only is good for Rose to be like, yeah, it's still a time machine, but also for the audience, just as a viewer, to be like, no, this really is a time machine. We're gonna go wherever we want, whenever we want.
Yep.
Sort of doubling down on that.
Past, present, and future.
Yeah. Diving into some actual specifics of the episode, the cold open of the show, if you listen through the whole thing, you can hear the sound of the gas lamp. That little, like, whoosh of, gas flown in. And it's heard all throughout that first scene until it fades into the Gelth ghost waking up and freaking out and screaming. Which is a nice little bit of foreshadowing, because it's right off the bat. It's like, that's going to have something to do with this, which is going to solve all their problems in the end.
Yep.
That's sort of reinforced again in the theater when Charles Dickens notices the ghost and points her out. You hear that gas lamp sound again.
Interesting. And,
yeah.
I didn't realize that because, I'm not very observant about those things like you. I'm sure that if I watched the episode again, though, I would pick that up. But just thinking about when Charles Dickens sees the lady in the audience, this is totally off subject, just so you know, but it just made me think about it. I'm like, no one else notices her. I'm always that viewer that I look at these, like, things happening and I'm like, am I the only one that would be like, this lady's, a zombie lady right here?
Yeah.
I'm like, come on, people, wake up. But
they were just all so enraptured by his performance.
Which is interesting, too, because, again, totally side note, but, he's standing up there and he's reciting his work, which I think that a lot of people don't realize that's kind of how stories were told, forever, basically, is someone would stand up on stage and they would tell a story or, recite their short story or whatever, and that's how a lot of Charles Dickens' work got displayed to people, is just a one-man person reading his work.
Yeah, actually, a few years ago, Neil Gaiman dressed up as Charles Dickens and read A Christmas Carol on stage.
That's funny.
So, yeah, it's even continued.
Yeah, that's cool. I just think it's interesting how, media has changed so much, from, I don't even think that I've even heard in this day and age about someone just, reciting their story on stage. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it happens, but it's not something that's widely advertised or anything.
I guess there are author talks, and maybe they'll read an excerpt.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like you're going to stand up there and read a full work.
Yeah.
It's going to be a little passage, and you're going to do, like, a Q&A session.
Yeah, exactly. And people, now, if they want to do that, they're going to make a movie, or,
Yeah, or audiobooks.
Yeah. I thought it was really funny how, they landed in Naples in 1860, and it totally ended up being Cardiff 9 years later. Like, it's just it's such a funny joke, I feel like.
Yeah.
Not only because this is like the doctor who does this for his whole life and he can't even get the time and the place right.
Yeah.
But also that it ends up being Cardiff. And you could just tell by the look on Rose's face when he says that. She's like, really? This is where we went?
Right. We go from a space station where we've just watched the Earth blown up to Wales.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's so funny. I was cracking up about it.
We also get our first musical appearance of God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen in this episode, which has a tendency to show up in a lot of Christmas episodes.
So is this the music that plays, like, basically throughout the whole episode with the bells?
No, it's the God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen.
Duh.
Yeah.
Please, can you sing it again? Just kidding. For everyone out in the back row.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely, I was like, oh god, it does show up in this episode. It's also, it's what the brass quintet plays in our next Christmas episode when they're trying to destroy everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say it shows up a few other times as well. It's just sort of a strange thing that's the one carol that shows up consistently.
That is interesting. I wonder if it has, I don't know, like some hidden meaning. Like someone at the show just really likes that Christmas carol or something.
Yeah, I guess.
Really silly like that. Mine would be Jingle Bells. Jingle Bells would just play in every single episode. Every Christmas episode.
That's good. We do get some sleigh bells.
Yes.
When they first land.
I heard the sleigh bells, and I'm pulling my music knowledge, my little music knowledge that I have. So obviously correct me if I'm wrong. But I do know that sleigh bells came up a lot in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
Were there also xylophones in the music? Yes?
Yeah, I call it a xylophone.
It was
some sort of xylophonic percussion instrument.
Okay, that's all. That's my music knowledge.
Yeah.
I thought I was right, but I'm like, that sounds like a xylophone, and those are sleigh bells, so...
Yeah.
And they played a lot. Like, the same... I don't know. What do you call it? The same clip or whatever of music?
Yeah, same piece.
There we go. That's more music-y.
Yeah.
They played a lot throughout the whole episode, and that definitely reinforces the whole Christmas,
Yeah.
And I immediately, when they landed and you hear those sleigh bells, I'm like, oh, it's Christmas time.
Yeah, and it's snowing, and, when Rose steps out of the TARDIS, I do believe that's the music you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, bright and sort of wondrous, and it keeps sort of the same simple instrumentation of her theme, and maintains sort of that innocence we were talking about last week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's Christmas.
It definitely had, like, kind of an exploring-y vibe as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're going on an adventure, And what's interesting is the same piece of music. Same, I don't know if it's the same exact one, but very similar to it plays when Charles Dickens is going through the house, and he's like, trying to find the strings on the dead person and stuff. So I thought that was kind of interesting, is they were both kind of like exploring and going on an adventure.
Yeah, I sort of love how Charles's, can we call him Charles?
Charlie.
Charlie. Charlie's sort of journey here, learning that he doesn't know everything about the world, sort of mirrors Rose up until this point, except with Charles we get sort of a more condensed, just episode-long version of it. Yeah. From his utter disbelief to his anger to his acceptance and ultimately joy that he has so much more to learn.
Yeah. It's interesting, and like I said, I did research on Charles Dickens before this, and he definitely had an interesting life. And obviously I got this all from the internet, so it's all completely true. But he fathered 10 children, is what I read, which is a whole lot of children.
Yep.
So I was very interested in that, and then I was just reading all about the drama in his life, and his wife, and his mistress, and all of that. So I definitely think that, Doctor Who played upon a lot of his history, like personal history as well, just from the little one-liners that he has. Like, he says something about his family matters back home and all of that. And when it comes to historical characters, I think that Doctor Who does a really good job about portraying them. Obviously not everything can be exactly historically accurate when it comes to that, but I think that Doctor Who does a very good job about, not only Charles Dickens, but anyone in the future as well. I think that they do a good job representing them.
Yeah, because even though, all of those little details aren't explicitly stated, they do a good job of, distilling it all down.
Yeah. So
we can have this character who is true to the actual person.
Also, because, we're just jumping around, and that's basically what we do when we talk together, is
pretty much.
We just jump around, because that's, our personalities. But anyways, this is kind of the first time we get to see, the TARDIS kind of be cool, because not only is it cool, but, Rose goes and gets changed, and all of this cool clothes and stuff, and that's the first instance that you're kind of like, oh, the TARDIS has, a lot of bells and whistles to it, too.
Yeah. Up until that point, really all we ever see is the control room. And I just love how when they're flying it, it's all smoky and there's an alarm going off. And it's like, is it supposed to be doing that? And then it cracks me up after Rose goes back to the wardrobe, which is as of yet unseen. And she comes back and he's under the floorboards fixing stuff.
Yeah.
I like that.
I know, it is funny, and he didn't even change. He changed jumper.
Yeah.
That's what he says. And I always wonder about the closet, because again, I'm the viewer that always wants to point out the little details. But I always wonder if it's he has, or the TARDIS has all of these clothes that you can pick from, or is it like a Mary Poppins bag where you just reach your hand in and it gives you what you want, both ideas would be really cool.
Because we do actually see the wardrobe later on, with Ted sort of trying to find his look and stuff, and he's going through stuff, it doesn't give him what he needs immediately, so true. Maybe it just gives you a little section.
That is true. Or maybe it, changes to the person that is in it,
Maybe.
It's very interesting, because I don't know, I just don't see the Doctor, up until this point, accumulating a bunch of women's clothing and keeping it in the TARDIS, but I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what the complexities of the TARDIS are. I'm just saying, it's where my mind goes when I watch these episodes.
It's true, who knows? He just could have had a shopping binge and, like...
It's true.
Just stashed it all away for later.
Very true. I thought it was really funny, too, when the doctor realizes that he's with Charles Dickens in the stagecoach. Like, it's funny because, you know, he has this person following him around for a little bit, or, you know, communicating with him for a little bit, and he never once thought to, you know, say, oh, who are you, or whatever. He's just like, all right, come along, let's go.
Yeah.
And then, oh, by the way, you know, he's Charles Dickens. And it was funny because I felt like the doctor was really starstruck when he found that out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he talks about being a fan, a fanatic, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's funny to think that this man who's hundreds of years old and has traveled so many different places and realms and everything like that can get starstruck.
And then I love how it almost immediately becomes normal to him. Because when Rose wakes up and they go and rescue her, she's like,
Hi.
Hi. Who's your friend?
Charles Dickens.
Okay.
it's like a totally normal thing that he's still super hyped about.
Yeah, it's funny. And then I thought that the whole conversation about being a fan was hilarious.
Yeah. Is it the, how do you resemble a method for cooling oneself, or whatever the line was?
Yes. That was too funny.
I think it's weird how we don't hear any major character themes in this episode. You know, so after we've gone and established everything, they're nowhere to be found in this episode.
Why do you think that is?
In all reality, it's a bit lighter of an episode. You know, it's Christmas, there are ghosts, they're hanging with Charles Dickens, of all people. But it did sort of shock me that it didn't show up, either of them, towards the end, when Rose and the Doctor get into it over letting Gwyneth open the rift.
Yeah.
You know, because that ultimately has been the basis of their themes showing up so far, is that the Doctor's guilt over the Time War and him thinking he's destroyed essentially this entire species, his guilt and his need to save them, versus Rose's humanity going, you can't let them walk around in dead people.
Yeah.
You know, I thought it was strange that they didn't show up at all.
Yeah, I definitely picked up on that because, you know, obviously now I'm trying to listen for them, or, you know, I'm recognizing them more. But I kind of going off of what you say, I think that obviously the first two episodes were establishing characters more than anything else. You know, they wanted people to connect with the characters, whereas I feel like this episode was more about the show and them displaying kind of what the show was about rather than the characters.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I was very surprised that when the Time War was mentioned, you know, nothing happened, you know, because that's kind of the Doctor's internal struggle right now is with the Time War and everything, obviously. So I think that that would have been a very appropriate place for his theme, but, I mean, who knows?
Then again, maybe it was on purpose, since we had sort of got used to it in these past two episodes, being like, oh, the Time War, the Doctor's theme is going to show up.
Yeah.
You know, it's a bit more unsettling that it doesn't.
Yeah.
And maybe it's sort of a sign that, you know, traveling with Rose so far has sort of started to change him a bit. You know, that the Time War is not automatically an indicator of his theme needs to show up because this is who he was, sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's almost like, you know, obviously when the theme plays, that's an indication of him and who he is, but also when it doesn't play, it's also indicating something as well.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think it's just as important to note when it doesn't show up as when it does.
Yep, exactly. The Gelf.
Yeah.
Terrifying, just so you know. On just like a foundation level, terrifying to me. And I know that when they're displayed to everyone, obviously they have, you know, children voices. They're kind of like ethereal, like not, you know, not necessarily what you'd think of as a ghost per se, very modern-y, and obviously the Gelth are trying to portray themselves like that to be pitied.
Yeah.
To, they know as a human race what's going to get us to feel for them the most, and that's children.
Yep.
I've always gone by the standpoint of, if it's a scary child talking, that's not good.
Yeah.
And anything, when you get to the scariest episode of all time in the show, the mummy, where that episode, same thing. You see a child, they look creepy, run away. That's my advice for everyone.
Even in real life, if I'm at work, I've run into a couple of creepy kids, and I'm like, I'm gonna go over here for a bit. I was like, I'll help you if you need, but it'll be from a distance.
Exactly. I feel like if other people just followed that more, then we wouldn't have to deal with the scary children as much.
Now that I think about it, it's a pretty common horror trope. Not that I'm real big into horror or ever really have been. I've sort of been forcibly dragged along by some friends. But I think it is just because automatically our brains go, oh, it's a kid, it's innocent. Mm-hmm. If it needs help, it needs help, Which, ugh.
I know. And the thing is I can do horror films. Give me a clown any day, I'm fine. If it's about ghosts, I'm fine. Supernatural creatures, we're good. Mm-hmm. Scary kids, I'm done. We're not doing it. I'm not even gonna watch it. That and dolls. I'll never watch a show with dolls.
No, scary kids, scary dolls. I'm out.
I definitely like Gwyneth and her character a lot in this episode. Mr. Sneed, I wasn't too much of a fan of, but I think that's kind of how they wanted to portray him.
Yeah.
But I definitely liked Gwyneth's character.
Yeah. She's fascinating to think about, not only on her own, but, her connection to Gwen Cooper. Mm-hmm. 'Cause I don't know if it's ever been confirmed. I want to say Gwen Cooper is related to Gwyneth somehow.
That would make sense.
Just because that's how they tend to sort out all of these continuity things with actors showing up in one episode and then showing up in another episode. Or, showing up more permanently, because it's happened a lot.
It's either that or they had no way of explaining it, so they're just shoving it in your face. Yeah, we know that she was in a past episode, and we're going to name her Gwen in Torchwood, too.
Yeah.
Which I could see them doing as well. So, obviously, like I said, I haven't watched Torchwood. I've seen a few episodes, but does Gwen have, any kind of, I don't know, supernatural powers, psychicness, or...
No.
No, because that would be interesting.
Gwen is just a police officer. According to canon, they're not related. Okay, it's just striking similarities.
Like I said, it's like they want you to say, ha, we're going to name her Gwen just to mess with you guys, because we know you're going to recognize her.
I think she's the only one they've done the similar name thing with.
Well, Gwyneth, who is psychic, clairvoyant, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, medium.
Part of the rift, essentially, is what it actually is, but...
Yeah, all of the above.
Happy medium, according to the doctor.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting, just kind of how you think about, supernatural beings or, supernatural instances, but people don't really think about it in the past terms. They always think about, in the present or the future, and that's what Doctor Who kind of shows, is that these type of things can happen no matter where you are or what time you're in. Mm-hmm. And that makes sense, obviously. People kind of have this pinhole view of, well, it's going to happen now or it's going to happen in the future when it comes to that type of things, but nope.
It's sort of pushing your boundaries, your knowledge, what you believe. which I think is also interesting that it happens in this episode, because again, that's what we see Charles Dickens doing. So it all just sort of ties back into itself in a neat little package.
Yep.
Also, via Gwyneth's sort of clairvoyance, we got our second mention of Bad Wolf. It's much more blatant this time.
Just yelled at her, that's why.
Yeah.
Bad Wolf!
Yeah, pretty much.
Like I even picked up on it I said it last episode, I didn't pick up on it until you mentioned it, but this time I was like, there it is, right there.
Yeah, some of them are definitely more blatant than others.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, a few of them stand out, so even if you don't pick up on all of them, you can maybe have started to connect something's happening there by the end of the series.
You know, and just that whole interaction between Gwyneth and Rose, I felt was really interesting because obviously they did it so you can see the difference between the two and how times have changed and everything. But I just thought the whole conversation was hilarious. I mean, Gwyneth talks about how she gets paid £8 a year, and Rose is like, "What?" You know, and then Gwyneth says, "Oh, I know, I would have been happy with 6 or whatever she says." And then she talks about going to school every Sunday, which was a lot for her. And then when Rose starts talking about looking at boys with her friends, you could just tell that they're just totally different worlds that they're in. Obviously, different times, different worlds.
Yeah. I'm gonna go.
What are you Googling now?
How much?
Oh, I did it already.
Oh, did you?
I did. Are you interested to know?
Yeah.
Because again, this is the type of things that I single in on when I watch these shows. You say £8 in 1869, I'm going to go to Google, I'm going to look it up. Now there are a lot of different calculators when it comes to this type of thing. But again, I got this off the internet, so it is true. I calculated that it would be 832 pounds in 2017, which would actually be $1,066.
Okay, I got a very different number.
Again, there are many different search mechanisms on the Google, or the internet, if you will. Everything is accurate, because everything you pull off the internet is true. What did you get?
Okay, well, no, that's 17 years off, so...
I know, I first searched in 2000 as well. For you viewers at home, we are currently searching how much £8 is in this day and age. This is how we spend our time. We need to know.
I know. I don't want dollars. I'm gonna go with your number.
If you are a mathematician or an inflation specialist or whatever you want to call it, and you know the exact amount, please let us know what the difference of £8 in 1869 would be in comparison to today.
Around there. Now you
Yes.
know, Internet.
The more you know.
The more you know.
But yes, I did look that up before I came here.
Yeah. Man.
You should have known.
I should have known. There's so much of that that's going to be edited that you don't know about.
Silly.
Also, in a couple of places, just sort of to point it out, we talked about how in the first episode in Rose, they use a lot of MIDI instruments.
I'm sorry, say that one more time. MIDI?
MIDI.
MIDI.
Musical Instrument Digital Interface.
I'm glad I asked.
Yeah, basically computer instruments.
Oh.
Which
Wait,
we
say
talked
it one
about.
more time.
MIDI. Musical Instrument Digital Interface.
Okay.
Yeah. Which we talked about happens a lot in pilots and shows that don't have a lot of budget because it's cheaper. And I noticed it. I might be wrong. It might just be how the electronics are mixed. So it might be an orchestra. I honestly couldn't tell. I watched it a couple of times, but that scene in the cold open towards the very end where spooky ghost lady's walking through the streets, it sounds like we've reverted back to MIDI in a couple of places, after having full orchestra in the second episode, which is still not surprising, given, the budget of the show and everything, and I don't know, maybe time constraints led into it or something, I don't know. But it's always an interesting thing to keep an eye out for, or an ear out for.
I'll try to use my music knowledge on that next time.
Yeah, use
MIDI.
up that music knowledge, MIDI.
I'm going to start dropping these terms, like, in my everyday life, and just see what people say.
Do it.
And be like, did you hear that MIDI music the other day?
It's bumping.
Yeah. No, you learn something new every day.
While we're on the subject of music, going back to the bells and stuff that you brought up earlier.
The xylophones.
The xylophones. Mm-hmm. When Gwyneth and Mr. Sneed are out body snatching, and he tells her to use the sight to find, I can't remember old lady's name, to find old lady.
Yeah.
The music becomes these suspended chords and these irregularly metered bells. So it's super unsettling and disconcerting and, throws you off for a minute because up until, well, maybe not up until this point, but you hear that and then it moves on to the sleigh bells and the happy xylophones and Christmas time.
Mm-hmm. I thought that it was interesting, too, kind of how the Doctor approaches the Gelth and everything. Because, up until this point, we've heard of the Time War, but he's mentioned it to Rose, but he obviously hasn't delved into, like, how it affects him very much. Mm-hmm. And obviously, when the Gelth say, they were a victim of the Time War or affected by the Time War, you can just see how the Doctor changes kind of his actions in a way.
Yeah.
All of a sudden he's like, we're helping them, at all costs. When, logically, if you think about the Doctor, he wouldn't necessarily do that unless it was, like, about the Time War or something.
Yeah.
I feel like he would have approached it a different way if they hadn't been affected by the Time War.
Yeah, absolutely. You can tell there's sort of that immediate shift, which is why he sort of goes off the rails after that seance. But then I think he sort of ends up wrestling with himself and Rose's point that you can't let these ghosts walk around and dead people, because he offers them a compromise in the end. He says, let them come through. They can use the bodies temporarily. He'll take them somewhere until they can build new ones. Which I don't think is something he would have done if Rose hadn't have been there. I think he was just gung-ho, let him have them. No one else is using these dead bodies.
Yeah, he doesn't have that human perspective on it, I feel like.
No.
And, obviously he does kind of change his stance at the very end, or he kind of gets that, humanity. I'll use that word, that's not what I'm looking for. But I thought that just the whole interaction with Rose, because we've talked about, the role that Rose plays with the Doctor is to kind of bring him back to humanity, bring him back down, and she confronts him about it. And obviously he hasn't had that. And, again, we've talked about this in the last episode, but, she even goes to say, you can't do this, and then he kind of goes back at her and says, this is how it is, and you can leave if you don't like it.
Yeah.
And I think that, obviously, that was a defense mechanism for him, because I don't necessarily think that he meant that. I just think that, no one's really gone against him at all. And then I think that he kind of realizes what she's talking about at the end and does give that compromise because of what she says to him.
Mm-hmm. That's all the notes I have, so...
I have,
Go for it.
I only have one more thing. And
Okay.
It's basically my favorite part of the whole episode, and that's at the very end, when, Dickens just wants to ask one question to the Doctor. and he asks, do my books last?
Yeah.
And, as a very avid television watcher, typically, people will say, yeah, it lasts 100 years, but in this case, it lasts forever. And it's just, like, very eerie, I feel like, and it, like, gives you goosebumps because the doctor would know if it lasts forever,
Yeah.
And so I just think that that's such a great ending to, like, the episode because it kind of ties in Charles Dickens and them meeting such a monumental person. So I just thought that was a great quote.
Yeah. It's a nice little bow at the end to make you go, oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Tug at your heartstrings a little.
I know. And then you're like, oh, it's so sweet. He's going to go back with his family and everything. And then the doctor has to ruin it and tell Rose that he dies the next year.
The next year?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, at least he was
Which
happy.
happens again when they meet Van Gogh.
Yeah.
Same exact kind of thing.
Yeah.
I love that episode too. But
Me
that's
too.
for another day.
Yeah.
Another episode.
Alrighty, that's going to do it for us this week. Our next episode, where we will be discussing both Aliens of London and World War III, since it's a 2-part episode, will be going up on September 7th. In the meantime, you can follow us on Twitter at Subwave Podcast, on Facebook at facebook.com/subwavepodcast, or on our website, which is subwavepodcast.com. And if you like what we're doing here, go ahead and give us a rating or review in iTunes, or your favorite podcasting medium if they allow it, because that really is a strong metric in how they decide to display podcasts. Share it with your friends, which is always helpful. Am I missing anything?
Nope.
Alrighty. So we will see you on September 7th. Goodbye!